People think revenge looks like fire screaming, broken glass, chaos. Mine looked like silence, like a woman smiling at breakfast while her husband texted another woman under the table. I wasn't broken. I was building a plan. My name is Amanda Lewis, and if you'd met me a few years ago, you would have said I was living the dream. I had the husband, the business, the family, the house on the hill with the glass balcony that caught the sunrise, like it was designed for magazine covers. People used to stop me at fundraisers or networking events and say things like, "You and Daniel are such a power couple." And I'd smile the kind of polished smile that hides exhaustion, compromise, and 1,000 swallowed truths. We met when I was 27. Just a girl with a marketing degree and too much ambition to fit inside a cubicle. Daniel was already established charming, older by 7 years, confident in that way men are when they've never been told no. He said I had a spark. He liked my ideas. And before I knew it, our partnership was both professional and personal. We started a design and construction company together. He handled the contracts. I ran the branding and clients. We grew fast, faster than anyone expected. Within 10 years, we had offices in 3 cities, employees who looked at us like legends, and enough money to make life smooth. From the outside, I was the lucky one, married to a man everyone respected, living in a house I designed myself, driving a car I didn't even have to think twice about buying. But if I'm honest, I stopped feeling lucky long before I stopped pretending I did. Marriage, I learned, doesn't break in one big moment. It wears down slowly, like a bridge with one bolt loosening at a time, until one day you're standing on it and it just gives way. Daniel and I had become more business partners than lovers. Our conversations were all logistics, deadlines, invoices, tax season, networking events, somewhere between board meetings and dinner parties. The us disappeared. He was charming with clients, but impatient with me. I could make 100 decisions at work, but one disagreement at home turned me into the problem. I learned how to step carefully, how to say less, how to keep the peace. Because that's what good wives do, right? They keep the peace. I used to look at him across our marble kitchen island and wonder if he ever saw me anymore. Not the business partner, not the manager, but me, the woman who once stayed up late sketching designs for our dream office, who used to surprise him with takeout and wine when we couldn't afford restaurants. But he didn't look at me. He looked past me, like I was furniture that spoke. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cruel. It was quiet. Quiet like slow erosion. Quiet like a clock ticking in an empty room. And the quieter it got, the louder the doubt grew in my head. But I told myself it was fine. We were fine. Because the world believed in our perfection. And I didn't want to be the one to break the illusion. Then came the signs, subtle, easy to dismiss. He started coming home later, his shirt smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't mine. He started going on more client dinners, and when I asked who with, he always had an answer ready, so quick it felt rehearsed. He bought a new suit out of nowhere, started working out again after years of indifference. It wasn't one thing. It was everything. A pattern. I remember the night it really sank in. We were hosting a dinner for one of our investors. I was wearing a black dress, the one he used to love. Halfway through the evening, I caught him smiling at his phone, thumb moving quickly. When I asked what was funny, he said, "Just a client message." But I saw it, the flicker in his eyes, the hesitation. He wasn't used to being caught. That's when I felt the first crack, small but real. I went to bed that night, staring at the ceiling, my body next to his but miles away. My heart wasn't racing, it was calculating. Not because I didn't feel pain, I did, but because something inside me shifted. I realized if I was right, and I probably was, this wasn't about love anymore. This was about strategy. People think betrayal is a wound. They're wrong. Betrayal is a teacher. It strips away the fantasy, leaves you raw and alert. And that night, I became alert. Over the next few weeks, I started paying attention to everything. His calendar, his receipts, his tone. He'd come home distracted, humming songs I didn't know, smelling like hotel shampoo. I'd ask how his day was. He'd kiss my forehead and say, "Busy." And I'd smile, not because I believed him, but because I knew I was watching a performance. And when someone's performing, you don't interrupt. You take notes. The truth didn't come to me in one explosive discovery. It arrived quietly, wrapped in a notification. One afternoon, he left his tablet on the kitchen counter while taking a call in the backyard. I wasn't snooping. I wasn't even curious until it pinged. A name I didn't recognize. The preview of a message that started with "last night was" and cut off. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. That half sentence said everything. I sat there for a long time, staring at that screen, and I felt calm. Not the kind of calm that comes from acceptance, but the kind that comes from clarity. I saw the entire picture at once: the man, the business, the money, the power he thought he held. And I saw my place in it, underestimated, silent, observant, the perfect position to strike from. That's when the idea started to form. Not revenge, not yet, just awareness. A map of possibilities. If this was the end of our marriage, it wouldn't be the end of me. It would be the beginning of something better. My version of freedom built not from anger, but from precision. I still remember what I whispered to myself that night as I looked out our bedroom window, the city lights flickering below. Let him play his game. I'll write the rules. And that's exactly what I did. The next morning, nothing looked different, but everything was. The kitchen smelled like coffee. The sunlight came through the same blinds. Daniel's laugh still echoed in the hallway. But underneath that routine hum of normal life, something had changed. I had changed. I didn't confront him. I didn't cry. I didn't even mention the message. Because if there's one thing I learned in business, it's this. The moment you reveal what you know, you give away your leverage. And I wasn't ready to do that yet. Instead, I became a ghost in my own home, watching, listening, learning. He thought he was clever, erasing messages, changing passcodes, hiding behind late meetings. But patterns always tell the truth. People always leave fingerprints when they think no one's watching. He started showering the second he came home. He used to throw his jacket on the chair, grab a drink, talk about work. Now it was straight to the bathroom, door locked. When he came out, he smelled like hotel soap, not our usual brand. That's how I knew he wasn't just careless, he was trying to erase something. I started paying attention to his phone habits. The way he'd keep it face down. The way he'd angle it slightly away from me at dinner. One night, I said, "You've been on your phone a lot lately. Everything okay?" He smiled. "Just business. You know how clients are." I smiled back. "Of course." Inside, I took note. He didn't even blink. I started keeping a journal. Not of emotions, of evidence. Dates, times, places, receipts. I treated it like a project file. Every business decision we'd ever made had been documented. Why should this be any different? A few weeks later, I noticed an unfamiliar charge on our joint credit card. A boutique hotel in the city. A place we'd never stayed. I could have asked. I didn't. I called the hotel instead, pretending to be confirming a reservation. The woman on the phone said, "Yes, Mr. Lewis checked in last Thursday evening, one night." My hand didn't shake. I just said, "Thank you." and hung up. That was the moment the illusion shattered completely. I didn't hate him. Hate is loud, messy. What I felt was sharper, like a switch had flipped in my mind. I saw everything for what it was, not romance, not love, but transaction. Our marriage was a brand, our home a showroom, and I had been managing the PR while he played a double life behind closed doors. That night, I went into my office and opened the company files. We had built Lewis and Hart from nothing. I was the Hart, my maiden name, but on paper, Daniel owned the majority. 60/40 split. When we started, it made sense. He was the one with capital, connections, confidence. I was just the creative mind. But over time, I became the one running operations while he spent more and more time networking. Now, I saw the imbalance for what it really was, my blind spot. So I started reading. At first, just small things, business law, blogs, asset division in marriage, shareholder rights. But then I got deeper. I found online courses, forums where women shared stories about rebuilding after infidelity and financial manipulation. I spent nights highlighting documents, learning how ownership structures could be shifted, how trust could be built quietly, legally. While he slept next to me, I studied. While he texted someone else from his late meetings, I learned the language of contracts, percentages, and power. I wasn't planning yet. I was preparing. The first real confirmation came 2 months later. We were at a charity gala. He excused himself for a client call. I watched him step outside to the balcony, his back turned to me. His voice softened the way it used to when he spoke to me. I couldn't hear words, just tone. And I knew. That gentle laughter, that warmth, it was gone from me, but alive for someone else. I stayed at the table, smiling, sipping champagne, feeling the quietest kind of heartbreak, the kind that doesn't destroy you but hardens you, like steel cooling after fire. When he came back, he looked straight at me and said, "You okay?" I smiled. Perfect. It became my word after that. Perfect. The armor I wore. Every time he lied, I said it. Every time I caught another clue, a second phone hidden in his briefcase, a sudden business trip that didn't appear on the calendar, I said it again. Perfect. Because perfection was the role I'd been cast in. And now, it was the camouflage that kept me invisible while I gathered the truth. I started backing up our files, transferring data to my personal drives, client lists, financial reports, tax returns. If I was going to dismantle this, I needed everything. He never noticed. Why would he? I was the one who handled the admin. He'd built his empire on my organization. He just didn't realize I could use it to unbuild him. Then one day, I found her. Not by name, by accident. An email came through our shared inbox from one of his subcontractors. Attached was a group invoice. Her name was there, an employee from a partner firm. I'd met her once. Early 30s, ambitious, sweet voice. The kind of woman who calls everyone on in meetings. She'd barely looked at me that day, but she'd looked at him a little too long. I remembered that. I sat there staring at her name. And for the first time, I smiled not from pain, but clarity. This wasn't about her. Women like her always think they're special. They think they're the exception. But I knew better. I wasn't going to fight for him. I was going to fight for myself. That night, I made a rule. No confrontation. No emotion. Only precision. From that day, I watched him not as a husband, but as a case study. I analyzed his movements, his financial choices, his weak spots. The affair became background noise. The real story was the architecture of control beneath it. He didn't notice the shift in me, how I stopped asking questions, stopped reacting. He thought he'd won. That's the thing about men like Daniel, they mistake silence for surrender. They never imagined silence could be strategy. I learned how he moved money between accounts, how he used company expenses to hide personal ones. He'd built a network of small manipulations, things that didn't look like crimes, but added up to power. I cataloged every one. One night, while he was asleep, I sat in the dark and whispered to myself, "You think you're building a secret life. You're not. You're building evidence." And in that moment, I knew when the time came, I wouldn't just leave him. I'd leave him exactly as he'd left me, unprepared. The discovery wasn't the affair. It was realizing who I really was underneath all that pretending. The woman who smiled through board meetings, who played the perfect wife, who built the business while he played the visionary. She wasn't weak. She was underestimated. And underestimated women are the most dangerous kind. That's when my plan, the blueprint, began to take shape. It wasn't a fantasy. It was a system. Every spreadsheet, every password, every transaction was a thread, and I was weaving them into something unstoppable. He thought he was hiding a secret affair. I was hiding the end of his empire. I remember the night I started building what I now call the blueprint. Daniel was asleep beside me, phone tucked under his pillow like a guilty secret. The glow from my laptop lit the room in that cold blue tone that always feels like decision-making light. My hands didn't shake. They typed, spreadsheet after spreadsheet, folder after folder, the architecture of my escape. I didn't think of it as revenge. Not yet. It was math. It was freedom translated into numbers. First, I mapped every asset we owned. The houses, the company shares, the investment accounts he thought I didn't understand. Then, the debts. Every loan, every payment, every liability that had my signature on it. I color-coded everything. Blue for assets, red for risk, gray for secrets. By dawn, I could see the shape of our life laid bare on the screen, every lie, every dependency, every opportunity. He used to tell me I wasn't business-minded. That sentence used to sting. Now it fueled me. I found small inconsistencies in our ledger's payments to a consulting service that didn't exist, reimbursements for client dinners that matched hotel dates. I gathered them quietly, labeling each file with a neutral name so he'd never suspect. I learned to send copies to a private cloud, a digital vault under a new identity I created using my maiden name and a post office box in another state. Then came the learning. Contracts, ownership clauses, divorce law. I studied them like a foreign language until I was fluent. I discovered that the company's bylaws allowed a restructuring vote if one partner could prove financial misconduct by the other. That sentence became my secret weapon. Weeks passed. Daniel got bolder, leaving town more often, calling me from hotel corridors with the echo of another life behind him. I played my part, the understanding wife, the loyal partner. I even started complimenting him more, the way he liked. It kept him comfortable, predictable. Meanwhile, I built alliances, quiet ones. Our accountant, a junior attorney I trusted, a friend in HR who owed me a favor. They didn't know the full story, just that I was reviewing compliance issues. The accountant gave me duplicate statements. The attorney helped me file a dormant ownership trust under my name, a move that looked like tax planning but was actually phase 1 of extraction. The more I learned, the more invisible I became. Daniel's arrogance was my invisibility cloak. He believed he'd outgrown me. He bragged about being the face of our brand, about carrying the company on his back. I let him talk. Words have a way of making men like him underestimate the quiet woman taking notes. At home, I rehearsed my patience like a ritual. Every dinner, every casual, "How was your day?" was part of the performance. I let him believe he was safe. Inside, I was rewriting the ending. The night before I executed the first step, I stood in our office, the one we'd built together, and looked at the logo on the wall, Lewis and Hart. My name was half of it. My work was all of it. For years, I'd accepted 40% because love had blurred my logic. But love had expired. Logic hadn't. The next morning, I initiated the transfer, a subtle change in company voting rights that no one noticed, because I used an old proxy Daniel had signed months earlier. It was legal, silent, and irreversible. From that moment on, I had the authority to act if I proved misconduct. And I could. I'd spent months building a file thick enough to break him professionally without ever stepping into a courtroom. Bank records, emails, falsified expense reports, every piece aligned. I didn't need revenge. I needed verification. I'd built a machine of truth, and it was ready to move. The day I finally met with my lawyer, I remember how ordinary it felt. No trembling, no tears, just paperwork and signatures. She looked at me and said, "Amanda, you're about to end both a marriage and a partnership." I said, "No, I'm about to end a fraud." That evening, Daniel came home early, flowers in hand, a peace gesture, probably guilt-driven. I smiled, took them, and set them in water. We ate dinner, talked about nothing, and he never noticed the way I watched him. He had no idea that the woman across the table had already taken back everything he thought was his. I didn't yell, didn't accuse, didn't gloat. I just lived my double life, the one where silence was strategy and patience was power. By the time he discovered the changes, it would be too late. Because the blueprint wasn't a plan anymore. It was a finished design, and I was already walking out of it, free. The day it all began looked painfully ordinary. Coffee brewing, inbox filling, Daniel humming in the shower. But inside me, a quiet drumbeat had started steady, certain. I'd built the plan brick by brick. Now it was time to walk through it. I left the house the same way I always did, kiss on the cheek, light smile, see you tonight, as a fine. He said, "Don't forget the client meeting at 6. I said, "Wouldn't miss it." And I didn't lie. I simply omitted that my client was my attorney, and our meeting was about ending every contract that tied me to him. My lawyer's office smelled like paper and determination. I handed over the file, the one I'd spent months curating, labeled neatly, "Financial Misconduct Evidence." She flipped through the pages, pausing now and then, eyes widening slightly. "You've done my job for me," she said. I smiled, just making sure everything's airtight. The divorce petition was ready, complete with documentation of hidden funds, misuse of company assets, and the clause that gave me authority to restructure. We'd file it quietly first thing the next morning, serving him at work, where the shock would have the most witnesses. It wasn't cruelty, it was precision. He'd humiliated our partnership in private. I'd dissolve it in daylight. Leaving that office, I felt the first real breeze of freedom. It wasn't triumph, it was relief. The kind that fills your lungs after holding your breath for years. I drove home calm, composed, every move rehearsed. That night, I cooked dinner, poured wine, listened as Daniel talked about a new development deal. He sounded so confident, so sure of his world's stability. I watched him the way a chess player studies a king, one move from checkmate, blissfully unaware. When he lifted his glass, I matched him. "To us," he said. "To us," I echoed, and swallowed the toast that would end it all. The next morning, the papers were filed at exactly 9:07 a.m. By 9:10, his assistant was handing him the envelope. By 9:15, my phone started ringing. I didn't answer. I was already at the bank. finalizing the transfer of assets into the trust I'd established under my maiden name. It was legal, documented, and beyond his reach. He called 10 times that morning, then stopped. At noon, a text appeared. "We need to talk." I didn't reply. I'd already said everything I needed to, through signatures, clauses, and numbers. When I finally met him that evening, it was at the office conference room. He was pacing, angry, confused, trying to regain control of the narrative. "Amanda, what the hell is this?" I sat down, calm, folder in hand. "It's a clean break." "You can't do this," he said. "The company is legally half mine." I finished for him. "Actually, slightly more now. You signed that proxy last year, remember?" He froze. I opened the folder and slid a document across the table. "Here's the audit trail," I said. "Every expense you buried, every charge you justified as client relations. I could take this to court, but I'd rather keep it quiet. Sign the transfer agreement, and you keep your reputation. Refuse, and we go public." He stared at me as if seeing a stranger. Maybe he was. The woman who once begged for honesty was gone. The woman across from him was the result of every lie he'd told. His voice dropped. "You planned this." I nodded. I learned from the best. For a moment, he looked small, like a man realizing the empire he'd built on confidence had no foundation. He signed 3 strokes of ink, and it was over. I didn't gloat, didn't smile. I stood, gathered my things, and said quietly, "You always said I wasn't business-minded. Guess I learned." Then I walked out. No fireworks, no shouting. Just the soft click of the door closing behind me, the sound of finality. In the weeks that followed, I moved through the wreckage with grace. Our employees stayed. The company rebranded under a new name, Heart Design Group. I kept the good people, restructured the rest, cleaned the books. Clients barely noticed the change. They trusted me. They always had. Daniel tried to reach out once, a half-hearted apology wrapped in nostalgia. I deleted it, because forgiveness wasn't the goal, clarity was. The execution wasn't about punishing him. It was about proving to myself that I could reclaim what was mine without losing my dignity. And I did. When the divorce was finalized, my lawyer asked if I wanted to celebrate. I said, "Not today, maybe someday." But that night, alone in my quiet house, I poured a glass of wine, opened my laptop, and saw my name, Amanda Hart, CEO. For the first time in years, it looked right. No hyphen, no shared title, just mine. I leaned back, exhaled, and let the silence settle. It wasn't empty anymore. It was freedom filling every corner of my life. That's what execution really meant. Clean, final, deliberate. No revenge, just release. Freedom didn't roar into my life. It arrived in small, quiet moments. Mornings when I woke without tension in my chest. Evenings when my phone stayed still and silent on the counter. The absence of chaos became its own kind of music. The first week after the divorce papers were finalized, I drove to the coast alone. No destination, no schedule. I parked near the water, kicked off my shoes, and walked until the sand cooled under my feet. The air tasted clean. I realized I hadn't breathed like that in years. Everyone expected me to fall apart, to cry, to rant, to seek closure. But there was nothing left to close. I'd already lived through the ending long before the papers were signed. What I wanted now wasn't revenge. It was room to exist without calculating anyone else's mood. I went back to work under the new name, Heart Design Group. Every decision felt lighter, sharper. I surrounded myself with people who valued collaboration instead of control. Some of the younger women on my team started asking for advice about careers, about marriage, about boundaries. I never told them the whole story, but I told them this: protect your name, protect your work, and never confuse silence with weakness. Months passed. Daniel tried to call once, then stopped. I heard through mutual friends that he'd taken a consulting job in another city, smaller projects, less shine. I didn't wish him harm. I didn't wish him anything. Indifference turned out to be the final stage of healing. One evening, while clearing old files from my laptop, I opened the original spreadsheet, the one that started it all. I scrolled through the color-coded cells, through the columns of numbers that once represented survival. Then I deleted it. Completely. Watching that file disappear felt like exhaling an entire decade. That night, I cooked for myself, nothing fancy, just pasta and a glass of wine, and sat on the patio, listening to the hum of the neighborhood. The same city lights that once reminded me of betrayal now looked like a skyline I could finally claim as mine. For the first time, my life felt unshared, unborrowed, undeniably mine. People think freedom is a destination. It isn't. It's a discipline choosing every day not to return to the cage you built with someone else. Mine was made of loyalty and fear. I dismantled it with logic and patience. I'm 54 now. I still keep the ring he gave me, not out of sentiment, but as proof that I can survive anything polished to look like love. Sometimes I turn it over in my hand and whisper, "Thank you," because without the lies, I'd never have learned the truth about myself. Freedom didn't make me fearless. It made me honest. And honesty, I've learned, is the most exquisite revenge of all.